There is a single number that, if calculated correctly, can completely transform your financial strategy. It's not your income. It's not your debt. It is not the return on any specific investment. It's a number that represents where you currently stand, in terms of where you need to be to achieve real financial freedom. And most people have never calculated that number in their lives. But today, I'm going to do something different. Today, I'm going to show you that this number, for millions of Americans and Latin Americans who are starting from scratch, or almost from scratch, can be surprisingly small. $15,000. And that, $15,000 is all you will need to start a machine that, if fed correctly and left alone for the appropriate amount of time, can produce $1 million completely automatically. I'm not talking about schemes. I'm not talking about risky bets. I'm not talking about volatile cryptocurrencies or frantic day trading. I'm talking pure mathematics, documented by decades of research from the Federal Reserve, Vanguard Research, and the National Bureau of Economic Research. I'm talking about the same principle that James Simons, the mathematician who built the most profitable fund in the history of financial markets, identified as the most powerful force in the economic universe. And the most fascinating part of this story is that you don't need to be a mathematical genius to use this force to your advantage. You just need to understand how it works, and have the discipline not to interfere while it works. Let me show you something that will change how you think about money forever. When James Simons founded Renaissance Technologies in 1982, he wasn't trying to predict the future of markets. He was trying to identify statistical patterns that repeated often enough to be explored mathematically. And one of the first things his team of physicists and mathematicians discovered was that exponential growth, the kind of growth that accelerates as time passes, was systematically underestimated by the human brain. It wasn't a failure of politeness. It was a biological hardware failure. Our brains evolved to think in linear terms because, in the African savanna, where we spent 99% of our evolutionary history, virtually everything grew in a linear fashion. If you walked 10 kilometers a day, in 10 days, you would have walked 100 kilometers. If you collected 10 fruits per hour, in 10 hours, you would have 100 fruits. Our brain was optimized for this type of calculation. But money doesn't grow like that. Money, when invested correctly, grows geometrically. And the difference between understanding linear growth and geometric growth is literally the difference between reaching retirement comfortably or anxiously. I'll give you a concrete example that illustrates this difference in a visceral way. Imagine two people. I'll call them Anna and Roberto. Anna lives in Austin, Texas. Roberto lives in Chicago, Illinois. Both are 30 years old. They both earn exactly the same salary. Both manage to set aside $15,000 to invest. The difference is only in what they do with that money and how they think about growth. Anna thinks linearly. She looks at her $15,000 and calculates, if I can get an 8% return a year, that means I'll make $1,200 a year. In 30 years, that would be $36,000 in earnings, added to the original $15,000, for a total of $51,000. Sounds reasonable, right? Roberto thinks geometrically. He understands that the 8% doesn't just apply to the original $15,000. It affects the total accumulated each year. The first year, yes, it's $1,200. But in the second year, the 8% applies to $16,200. In the third year, about $17,496. And so on, in a curve that accelerates exponentially. When Roberto does the correct calculation, he discovers that his $15,000 at 8% a year for 30 years turns into approximately $150,900. Not $51,000. $150,000. The difference between Anna's linear calculation and Roberto's geometric calculation is almost $100,000. And they both started with exactly the same amount. Before I continue, a quick question. Are you the type of person who makes financial decisions based on data or based on feelings? If I said data, you need to be subscribed to this channel now, because everything I share here is backed by research from institutions like the Federal Reserve, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the Journal of Finance. Hit the subscribe button. You'll want to be here in the next few weeks, because what I just showed you with Anna and Roberto is just the beginning of the story. That calculation assumed that they both invested $15,000 once and never put in a dime again. But what if I told you that there was a way to dramatically speed up this process using a principle that James Simons called the continuous feed system? The idea is elegantly simple. Instead of making a single investment and waiting, you set up an automatic system that regularly adds capital to your portfolio. And when you combine regular contributions with geometric growth, something mathematically extraordinary starts to happen. Let's redo Roberto's calculation with a small modification. Instead of investing $15,000 once, Roberto decides to divide it into monthly contributions of $417, which is approximately equivalent to $5,000 a year, or the same $15,000 over 3 years. But here's the crucial difference. Roberto doesn't stop contributing after 3 years. He maintains this rate of $417 a month for the full 30 years. Now watch what happens with the math. At 60 years old, Roberto doesn't have $150,000. Roberto has approximately $590,000, with the same rate of return, with contributions that fit the budget of a middle-class worker in cities like Houston, Phoenix, Denver, or Miami. The difference between the first scenario and the second is not luck. It is not market timing. It is not the choice of individual stocks. It's pure system architecture. Roberto built an automatic accumulation machine that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without needing constant supervision. But I promise to show you how $15,000 turns into $1 million, and $590,000 is still not $1 million. So let me add one more layer to this analysis, a layer that most financial advisors don't mention because it requires a virtue that few investors possess: radical patience. If Roberto, instead of retiring at 60, continues his automatic contribution system for another 5 years, just 5 additional years, his portfolio crosses the $850,000 mark. If he adds 3 more years, it comes to $1,100,000. 38 years of automatic contributions of $417 a month, at an average rate of 8% per year, transform a steady flow of modest capital into 7-figure wealth. And here's the most important detail of this math. 8% per year is not an optimistic projection. That's roughly the historical average of the S&P 500 adjusted for inflation over the last 90 years, according to data compiled by New York University finance professor Aswath Damodaran and confirmed by analysis from Dimensional Fund Advisors. James Simons understood this principle before anything else in his career as a manager. Before building sophisticated algorithms, before hiring physicists and mathematicians to decipher market patterns, he understood that the first rule of the financial game is not to interrupt the compounding process. In the book The Man Who Solved the Market, Gregory Zuckerman documents how Simons repeatedly emphasized to his team that the temptation to interfere with systems that are working was the greatest enemy of long-term returns. He called it the cost of restlessness. And that cost is measurable. Dalbar Inc., a research company that has analyzed investor behavior for over 30 years, annually publishes a study called Quantitative Analysis of Investor Behavior. The data is consistent year after year. The average American investor earns returns that are significantly lower than the market indexes in which they invest. Not because he chooses bad funds, not because you pay excessive fees, but because you can't leave your money alone. Buy when the market is rising for fear of missing out. Sell when the market falls due to panic of losing more. And this behavior of buying high and selling low, the exact opposite of what logic would recommend, costs the average investor between 2 and 3 percentage points of annual return, according to Dalbar data. Let me translate this into concrete numbers so you understand the magnitude of the problem. Remember Roberto and his $417 a month for 38 years? If instead of 8% a year, he only got 5% because he got restless, sold in moments of panic, tried to time the market, his final result wouldn't be $1,100,000. It would be approximately $480,000. The difference of 3 percentage points per year, accumulated over almost 4 decades, costs Roberto $620,000. More than half of your potential wealth evaporated not by bad luck, not by economic crisis, but by behavioral unrest. This is why James Simons built automated systems, not just because algorithms can process more data than humans, but because algorithms don't feel fear. They don't feel greed. They don't wake up at 3 in the morning worrying about newspaper headlines. They execute the programmed strategy regardless of the emotions that the market environment may provoke. And here we come to one of the most important discoveries of modern behavioral economics, documented extensively by psychologist Daniel Kahneman, Nobel laureate in 2020. Kahneman demonstrated that human beings suffer from something called asymmetric loss aversion. We feel the pain of losing $100 approximately twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining $100. This emotional asymmetry was useful on the savannah, where losing your resources could mean death, but it is catastrophic for long-term investments because it makes us overreact to temporary market drops, selling assets at the worst possible moment. Economist Richard Thaler, Nobel laureate in 2017, expanded this research and coined the term mental accounting to describe how we treat money irrationally depending on its mental origin or destination. And one of the practical applications of this research is devastatingly clear. The more frequently you check the value of your portfolio, the worse your investing behavior tends to be. Not because information is bad, but because every check is an opportunity for your emotional brain to sabotage your rational strategy. Quick social experiment. I want to test whether people who think mathematically about money focus on specific regions. Put your city in the comment below. It could be Miami, Austin, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, Bogota, Mexico City, Buenos Aires, Santiago, wherever you're watching. I'm genuinely curious about the geographic distribution of those interested in rigorous financial analysis. And while you type in your city, let me show you the next layer of this transformation from $15,000 to $1 million. Because up until now, I've only talked about regular contributions and behavioral discipline. I haven't talked about optimizing investment vehicles yet. And this layer adds more fuel to the machine. In the United States, there are tax structures specifically designed to accelerate long-term wealth accumulation. The 401k, the traditional IRA, and the Roth IRA are the best known. Each has its own characteristics, but they all share a fundamental principle. They allow your money to grow without being taxed annually. And that difference, growth with deferred taxation versus growth with annual taxation, is mathematically more significant than most people realize. I'll give you the numbers. If Roberto invests his $417 a month in a regular taxable account and is in the 22% tax bracket on long-term capital gains, his effective return is not 8%. It is approximately 6.2% after annual taxes on dividends and any rebalancing. Over 38 years, this difference of 1.8 percentage points reduces your bottom line from $1,100,000 to approximately $740,000. $360,000 evaporated in taxes that could have been deferred. Now, if Roberto uses a Roth IRA, where contributions are made with money already taxed, but all future growth is completely tax-free, he keeps the full 8% working in his favor for all nearly 4 decades. The difference in tax structure, holding everything else constant, is worth $360,000 in this specific scenario. James Simons was obsessive about tax efficiency. Securities and Exchange Commission documents show that Renaissance Technologies structured its operations in a way that legally minimized the tax burden on the medallion fund's returns. It wasn't evasion, it was optimization, and this mentality of treating every percentage point as precious is what separates sophisticated investors from amateur investors. The amateur investor looks at differences of 1 or 2% and thinks it is insignificant. The sophisticated investor understands that 1% per year, compounded over decades, can mean the difference between comfort and worry in retirement. Vanguard Research published a study in 2019 called Putting a Value on Your Value, where it calculated that a competent financial advisor can add approximately 3% annual returns to an investor's portfolio, not through asset selection as superior, but through behavioral decisions, fiscal efficiency, and disciplined rebalancing. 3%. It's exactly the difference between the undisciplined investor's $590,000 and the systematic investor's $1,100,000. Now let me address the objection that's probably brewing in your mind, but I don't have $417 a month to invest. My budget is tight. I have bills, I have debts, I have unexpected expenses. And this objection is completely valid. $417 a month is not a trivial amount for many families in Los Angeles, New York, Miami, or even cities with a more moderate cost of living like Phoenix or Denver. But here is where mathematics again offers a liberating perspective. The principle I'm describing doesn't require a specific amount to work. It works with any amount. The difference is only in the time needed to achieve the same result. If instead of $417 a month, Roberto can invest just $200, less than half, he can still reach $1 million. You'll just need more time. With $200 a month at 8% a year, Roberto reaches $1 million in approximately 47 years. If you start at 25, you will have your million by 72. If you start at 30, you will have it at 77. The numbers change, but the principle remains the same. And here's a revelation that few financial advisors make explicitly. Time is the most powerful variable in the compound interest equation. More powerful than the rate of return. More powerful than the value of contributions. Much more powerful than the choice of individual stocks or the timing of market entry. A study published in the Journal of Financial Planning in 2017 demonstrated that starting to invest 10 years earlier has a greater impact on final assets than doubling the monthly contribution rate. Let me repeat that because it's counterintuitive. Starting 10 years earlier is more powerful than contributing twice as much. A 20-year-old who invests $100 a month until the age of 60 will have more wealth than a 30-year-old adult who invests $200 a month until the age of 60, assuming the same rate of return. The young man contributed a total of $48,000 over 40 years. The adult contributed $72,000 over 30 years. And even so, the young man ends up with more money, because the first $100 he invested had 40 years to multiply geometrically, while the adult's first $200 had only 30. This is why James Simons, even though he made his fortune relatively late in life, was so emphatic about starting investment systems as early as possible for younger generations. In interviews compiled by MIT and the American Mathematical Society, Simons repeatedly emphasized that the greatest competitive advantage a young person can have in finance is not superior intelligence, not access to privileged information, not Wall Street connections, it is simply time. Decades of time to allow mathematics to work without interference. And this advantage is democratically available to anyone of any socioeconomic background. A young restaurant worker in Houston who starts investing $50 a month at age 18 has a structural advantage over a Wall Street executive who only starts taking investments seriously at age 40. It doesn't seem fair, it doesn't seem intuitive, but it is mathematically inevitable. I'm going to show you now what I call the financial singularity point, the moment where something extraordinary happens in any long-term investor's journey. As your portfolio grows, there comes a specific point where the annual returns generated by your investments exceed the amount you can contribute manually. In the case of Roberto with $417 a month, or approximately $5,000 a year, this point of singularity occurs when his portfolio reaches approximately $62,500. From that moment on, the 8% annual return generates more than $5,000 in growth. That is, more than Roberto is adding out of his own pocket. And from that point on, portfolio growth accelerates dramatically because there are now two sources of capital working simultaneously: Roberto's contributions and the portfolio's own reinvested returns. It's like a snowball rolling down a mountain. At first, the growth seems slow, but after a certain point, the acceleration becomes impressive. In Roberto's specific case, reaching $62,500 takes approximately 8 years of consistent contributions. It may seem like a long time, but consider the alternative. Without any system, Roberto would only have the money he could save without income. In 8 years of simple savings of $5,000 a year, he would have $40,000. With the automatic investment system, he has $62,500, a bonus of $22,500 that the market contributed through the compound interest mechanism. And from that point on, each subsequent year brings ever-increasing contributions from the market. In year 9, the market contributes approximately $5,000. In year 15, approximately $10,000. In the year 25, approximately $30,000. In the year 35, approximately $70,000. Money is literally making money in quantities that far surpass any traditional human savings effort. Here is where I need to make a critical distinction that separates serious analysis from irresponsible financial hype. When I talk about 8% per year, I'm talking about a long-term historical average. I'm not saying that every year you will receive exactly 8%. The reality of the markets is much more volatile. There will be years of 20% gains. There will be years of 30% loss. The financial crisis of 2008 saw the S&P 500 drop approximately 37% in a single year. The 2020 pandemic saw drops of more than 30% within weeks. If you are not psychologically prepared to see your portfolio fall by half at some point in your investing journey, you are not prepared to invest. And here is the most important data I can share on this topic. According to an analysis by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, covering data since 1930, the S&P 500 never had a 20-year period with negative returns. Never. 10-year periods have had negative returns on rare occasions. 5-year periods had negative returns more often. But if you can keep your investment horizon at 20 years or more, history strongly suggests that short-term volatility becomes statistically irrelevant to your bottom line. James Simons understood this viscerally. The Medallion Fund, its primary investment vehicle, had an explicit lockup policy that prevented capital withdrawals for specified periods. It wasn't just protection for the fund. It was protection for the investors themselves against their short-term impulses. Simons knew that the temptation to withdraw money during market declines would be overwhelming, and he designed mechanisms to prevent this temptation from materializing into destructive action. The individual investor does not have a fund manager imposing external discipline. He needs to create his own protection mechanisms against himself. And one of the most effective ways to do this is to completely automate the investment process. Set up automatic monthly transfers to your investment account, and never, under any circumstances, access that account to check your balance during periods of market turbulence. It seems simple. It's incredibly difficult in practice. But that's exactly what separates the 7% of investors who achieve real financial independence from the 93% who reach retirement dependent on Social Security or family members. In 2022, the FINRA Foundation published an alarming report on the financial situation of American families. Approximately 53% of American adults would not be able to cover a $400 emergency without resorting to credit or selling assets. Among families approaching retirement age, between 55 and 64, approximately 48% have less than $50,000 in retirement savings. These numbers are not the result of individual laziness or irresponsibility. They are the result of an educational system that does not teach practical financial mathematics, a consumer culture that encourages immediate gratification, and a financial industry that profits more from complexity and frequent movement than from simplicity and long-term discipline. The framework I'm presenting today is not sophisticated, does not require advanced knowledge of derivatives or technical analysis. It does not require you to dedicate hours a week studying company balance sheets. It's genuinely simple. Contribute regularly, invest in low-cost, diversified vehicles, optimize tax structures when possible, and don't touch the money for decades. The difficulty isn't in understanding. It's in executing consistently over time. I will now show you 3 complete scenarios that illustrate how different starting points converge for similar results when the system is respected. Scenario 1. Maria, 25, administrative assistant in Denver, Colorado. You can invest $150 a month, $1,800 a year. Average return rate of 8%. Use a Roth IRA for maximum tax efficiency. Never increase your contributions. Never withdraw. Never stop. At 65 years old, 40 years later, Maria has approximately $520,000. It's not $1 million, but it's more than $500,000 built by an administrative assistant who never earned a high salary. Scenario 2. Carlos, 35, store manager in Phoenix, Arizona. You can invest $350 a month, $4,200 a year. Average return rate of 8%. Uses 401k with partial employer matching of 3%. At age 65, 30 years later, Carlos has approximately $485,000 of his own contributions, plus approximately $140,000 of employer matching that he also compounded over time. Total, approximately $625,000. Scenario 3. Sophia, 20 years old, college student in Austin, Texas. He can only invest $75 a month, $900 a year, in part-time work. Average return rate of 8%. You never increase your contributions for 45 years until you are 65. Sophia contributed a total of $40,500 throughout her life. Your final portfolio, approximately $430,000. Sophia turned $40,000 into $430,000 just by starting extraordinarily early. These 3 scenarios reveal a pattern that Vanguard research consistently documents. There is no single values formula that works for everyone, but there is a universal principle that works regardless of specific values. This principle has three non-negotiable components: consistency of contribution, adequate time horizon, and behavioral non-interference. If any one of these three components is violated, the system fails. If all three are respected, the system works with impressive mathematical predictability. And here's where James Simons added an additional layer of sophistication that the individual investor can adapt: the idea of progressively increasing contributions. In the Medallion Fund, partners were encouraged to reinvest an increasing percentage of their returns as time went on. For the individual investor, this translates into increasing your monthly contributions whenever you receive a salary increase. The rule of thumb that many financial advisors recommend is to invest at least 50% of any salary increase. If you used to earn $60,000 a year and now earn $65,000, the additional $5,000 should be divided. $2,500 for improving your lifestyle, $2,500 for increasing investment contributions. This simple rule prevents the phenomenon called lifestyle inflation, where expenses increase in proportion to income, preventing any real accumulation of wealth. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the average American worker experiences approximately 20 pay raises over a 40-year career. If in each of these increases the worker allocated half to investments, the accumulated impact would be transformative. A study by the 2020 Employee Benefit Research Institute estimated that workers who practice automatic increase in contributions accumulate an average of 47% more wealth over the course of their career than workers with static contributions. 47%. It's the difference between $400,000 and almost $600,000 in Maria's scenario. It's the difference between the need to continue working and the option to stop. And this difference doesn't require any additional financial knowledge. Just setting up an automatic system that increases contributions in proportion to increases in income. We have now reached the last stage of this analysis, the moment where all the pieces connect into a complete picture. $15,000 is not an arbitrarily chosen magic number. It's a strategic number, calculated based on data from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. $15,000 represents roughly the most the average American worker can accumulate in 2 to 3 years of disciplined savings, even on a tight budget. It's an achievable number for most people who are willing to make temporary consumption sacrifices. It is a large enough number to create significant initial momentum when combined with regular contributions. And it's a small enough number that it's not paralyzing. Unlike goals like $100,000 or $500,000, which can seem so far away that they discourage any initial action. The transformation of $15,000 into $1 million is not instantaneous. It's not easy. It is not guaranteed against all possible scenarios of economic catastrophe. But it is mathematically likely within the historical parameters documented by the NBER, Dimensional Fund Advisors, Ibbotson Associates, and decades of peer-reviewed academic research. And the probability increases dramatically when the investor resists the temptation of constant interference, when he chooses low-cost, highly diversified investment vehicles, when he takes advantage of favorable tax structures, and when he maintains an appropriately long time horizon. James Simons did not build a fortune of over $20 billion through miraculous market predictions or risky bets on individual companies. Built through the relentless application of mathematical principles that anyone with access to a calculator can independently verify. The difference between Simons and the average investor isn't intelligence, it's execution discipline. If the mathematical framework I demonstrated today makes logical sense to you, hit the like button. Only about 3% of YouTube viewers actually like videos. Be part of that 3%. And if someone you know is making financial decisions based on intuition rather than data, share this video with them. It may be the most important analysis she watches this year. Because in the end, the difference between building real wealth and staying in cycles of financial anxiety isn't a matter of how much you earn. It's a matter of which system you use to process what you earn. And systems work. Emotions fail. Automatic contributions work. Intermittent discipline fails. Compound interest works. Hope for perfect timing fails. $15,000 invested with intelligence and patience can genuinely turn into $1 million. Not by magic, by mathematics. And math, unlike predictions and promises, doesn't need you to believe in it to work. This analysis is for educational purposes only, based on historical data and mathematical principles documented by institutions such as the Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and peer-reviewed academic research. Nothing presented here constitutes financial advice or investment recommendations. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Markets involve inherent risk and uncertainty. Always consult qualified financial professionals before making investment decisions. The goal is to share mathematical frameworks for thinking about money, not to prescribe specific actions for individual situations.